Okay, so this is the second part of the video. We're going to move on to the sine rule and the cosine rule and how and when to use them. So this is one that comes up almost every year, and it's one that students always struggle with. So let's try and break it down and see if it works better for you. So basically this is the sine rule. It is A over sine A is equal to B over sine B. Or you can have it as sine A over A equals sine B over B. What is the difference between the two of them? Well, the top one is basically, if you want a side. If you want a side, then you're going to use this top one. If you want an angle, you're going to use the bottom one. And that's really the only difference between them. A couple of things about the sine rule. When you do the sine rule, you're going to generally have four things. You're going to have an angle that you know, and you're going to have a side that you know, and these two are going to be opposite each other. You're then going to have another angle that you know, and you're going to have a side that you don't know. And they are also going to be opposite each other. Now bearing in mind the side and the angle can interchange. So it may be an angle you don't know, and if it's an angle you don't know, then it's going to be a side that you will know, and they'll switch back and forth. So I'll give you two examples here. Working on this triangle up here, let's take an example like this. So we have an angle of 50 degrees here. And opposite this, we have a side we don't know, which is x. Down here, we'll have 40 degrees. And opposite that, on this side, we will have a side of 10. Now, as you can see, that's what we do have. We have an angle that we know, which is 50. We have a side that we don't know. We have an angle that we know, and we have a side that we know. So we have four things, and one of them is unknown. So four things with one unknown. Another way this could look, the triangle doesn't always have to look like that. Maybe a triangle like this. So we could have something like this, 45 degrees. And then opposite that is a side that we do know, which is 12. We could have an angle that we don't know, A, and that's okay as long as we have what's opposite that, which would be 7. So again, four things. We've got two angles, two sides, but there's only one unknown. So this would be an example of where we would use a sine rule. So generally sine rules go, you often have this sort of shape. Once we have that, then we can start figuring out how to solve them. So let's start with this top one. Make a little bit of space here. Okay, so let's go solve this top triangle. We'll just move this stuff down out of the way so we have a bit of place. So what you have to ask yourself is, what do we want to know here? Well, we have the 40, we have the 50, we have the 10. So what we're looking for is x. So if we are looking for x, that means we're looking for a side. So we're going to use this one here. So it's going to be side A over the sine of A is equal to B over the sine of B. And basically this here is a side, and this one here is the corresponding angle that's opposite it. So if we're actually doing this here, we're going to put the side that we want. So that's going to be x. So we put our x in. So that's the side that we want over the sine of the angle that's opposite it. So opposite the x is, of course, 50 degrees. So we get the sine of 50 equals side B, which is 10. And that's over the sine of the angle that's opposite that. So that would be this one. So the sine of 40. And now what we've got is we've got an equation that we can solve. So get x on its own. So multiply both sides by sine 50, or bring it up. So you end up with x is equal to 10 multiplied by sine 50 all over sine of 40. And that's going to give you a final answer then. Okay, so we go back to our calculator and we'll work that out. So we got 10 multiplied by the sine of 50. That's going to give us equal that. And then we're going to divide by the sine of 40. And that's going to give us 11.91. So 11.92 rounded to 2 decimal places. So that gives us x, 11.92. So 11.92. Same thing then with this bottom one. Let's try this one. So on this one we've got a similar setup. But in this one we're looking for the angle. So we start with what we're looking for. So if we're looking for the angle, you can see from our equation up here, we're probably going to use this one here. So sine A over A. So using this, we've got sine A over A equals sine B over side B. So filling this in, the sine of A. So start with the angle that you're looking for, which is going to be this, the sine of A. You put that over the side A, which is the one that's opposite. You put that over 7 equals the sine of B, the other angle that we have, which is 45 degrees. And you put that over the side B, which is 12. And again, same thing here. We now have an equation that we can figure out. So sine A is going to be equal to 7. Bring the 7 up. Multiplied by sine 45. All divided by 12. So now we have sine A is equal to, and again on our calculator, we can go 7 multiplied by sine of 45 equals, okay, there's a problem there. So 7 multiplied by sine 45. And that gives us that. We're going to divide that by 12. And that gives us that. And we'll change that to a decimal. So sine of A now is 0.412. So to work out what A is, we've got to bring the sign across like we did earlier on. So inverse sine of 0.412. So back into the calculator. So inverse sine of 0.412 works out to be 24.33. So A is 24.33. And that, okay, it can get a little bit more complicated in the sense that you may get questions that read a little bit more complicated. There might be a bit more in it. But in general, that's the sine rule covered. Okay, so let's move on. The next one then is going to be the cosine rule. And this is the final one we're going to study. So let's go grab a triangle. Okay, so we're back with the cosine rule. I've written out the cosine rule for you here. A squared is equal to b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cos A. A couple of things to note. First of all, this is a side. This is a side. This is a side. And these two things are sides as well. You know they're sides because they are all small letters. This is the only angle that we've got in the cosine rule. So when do we use the cosine rule? I think that's where students get confused. So the first place you can use the cosine rule is if we have an example like this. So let's say we have 50 degrees here. We have x on this side. So starting to look like the sine rule. But then we have a side here of 8 and we have a side of 10. Now the sine rule won't work here because for a sine rule you have to have the unknown side and the angle, which you do have. But then you have to have the 8 and another angle here. We don't have that, so we can't do that. We would have 10 and the angle up here for the sine rule, but again we don't have the angle opposite the 10, so we can't use that either. So this is where we use the cosine rule. If we have a side that's unknown and we have the angle that's opposite it, so in this case we've got x and we've got 50, and as long as you have two sides on either side of the angle 50, then you can use the cosine rule. So that's what we're aiming for if we're missing one side. So the other place you can use the cosine rule is in this second example. In the second example, this is a lot more easier to understand. Let's say we have an angle here and we will call it B. we have a side of 7, we have a side of 12, and we have a side of 10. So if you have 3 known sides and you have an angle that's unknown, you would use the cosine rule here. They're the only 2 occasions that you're going to use the cosine rule. Let's try and do this example here at the top, and we'll work down through it. So working through it, well, we're going to rewrite out our cosine rule, we're going to fill in all our parts. So the way to do this is we have to look at what we're trying to find. So we want to find x. And x and the 50 degrees across from it are intertwined. So this is going to be our side A, and this is going to be our angle A. So when we're dealing with A up here, that's going to be our side, and cos A, that's going to be our angle opposite it. So that's what we're going to fill in. So let's start. We've got x squared equals, and then we fill in all the other bits and pieces, but it's going to be cos 50 degrees. Because the x and the 50 are opposite each other. So that's small a and large A. So what's the B and the C? The B and C is just the other 2 sides, and the order doesn't matter. So we've got 8 squared plus C squared is going to be 10 squared. And then it's going to be 2 multiplied by B, which is going to be 8, and multiplied by C again, which is going to be 10. And now we have our equation set up. So all we've got to do is go and figure it out. So we've got x squared then is equal to 64 plus 100. Then you can do this whatever way you want. So we got minus 160 here, multiplied by cos of 50. That's going to give you x squared equals 61.15398 when you work it out in the calculator. So to work out x then, x is going to be obviously the square root of that, 5398. So that leaves us then with x equals 7.82. Most of these are going to be correct to 2 decimal places. So that's the first example. The second example, just move down a small little bit. You're going to do exactly the same thing, working off the cos rule. Right, so for this next example, I'm just going to change that to angle x, just so it doesn't cause any confusion. So again, in this cosine rule, we're going to be dealing with a squared is equal to b squared plus c squared minus 2bc, and then the cos of a, your angle. So again, in here, this is the main one we're looking at, the x and the 12. So this is the angle x. So if this is the angle we're looking for, then a is the side that's opposite. So we're starting with 12 squared. So 12 squared then is equal to b squared plus c squared. So that's going to give us 7 squared plus 10 squared minus 2 times bc, which is 2 times 7 by 10, multiplied by the cos of the angle, which is x, which we don't know. So this is going to give us 144 is equal to 149 minus 140 cos x. Now, at this point, we need to fix this bit. So anything with a value of x, I want to get it positive. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take this part, I'm going to bring it over the other side of the equals, and I'm going to bring the 144 over here. When I bring that over, that's going to give me 140 cos x is equal to 149 minus 144. So you end up with 140 cos x is equal to 5. So cos x then is going to be equal to 5 divided by 140. Now, cos x then, when you do 5 over 140, is going to be 1 over 28. So x then is going to be the inverse cos of 1 over 28. And again, that can be just tapped into the calculator as a decimal. So you end up with x is equal to 88 degrees. So that finishes a revision of the cos rule. We'll have a look at some examples in the sample papers.